This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky. Join our conversation at WNPR.org/The Wheelhouse. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. Joining us, as always, to talk about the week's news is Colin McEnroe. He hosts The Colin McEnroe Show on WNPR. Hi there, Colin.
Good morning, Mr. Dankosky.
Also with us today is Dan Haar, editor and columnist at Hearst, Connecticut Media. Hello there, Danny.
Good morning. Great to be here.
And thanks also to Christine Stewart. She's editor-in-chief of CTNewsJunkie.com. Good to see you, Christine.
Good morning, John.
So, coming into this year's legislative session, progressives in the legislature outlined some ways they plan to take advantage of the newly expanded numbers. 4 weeks left to wrap up their business. None of the core goals have cleared either the House or Senate. Yesterday, House Speaker Joe Arasimowicz set out a schedule of 17 remaining days that House members can expect to be in session.
We sent out session dates almost 3 weeks ago to inform all House members, both Democrat and Republican, what we planned on being here. Some of that is subject to change. Like if we go late, if we don't get to as many bills as we think we need to get to, we will come in other days.
What I love about this, Christine, we're going to get into the substance of some of the things that have not gotten done yet, but it's all about scheduling at this point. We've already been doing this session thing for a little while now, and now we're going to start talking about, what days we're going to come in, about 17 days or so. And is this typical? This is how it always works, right? We're going to set out a plan for how many days they're going to be in the session, and as we all know, every single bit of the work is going to get done on the day or two just before the session ends.
Right. Everything seems very laissez-faire this year, and nobody seems to be in charge, and we're just going to come in, we're going to pass some bills, maybe not, who knows? and I think, yesterday was, for the most part, the House caucuses, the House Democratic caucus's first actual caucus behind closed doors to get a firm vote count and on some of these bills. So they don't even have that. They have 23 new members in the Democratic caucus and another group of members.
How different is this than usual? Because we always make fun of the fact that things don't really get done until near the end, and we talk about this model of governing not necessarily being the most efficient. But is this different even than what we usually see from the Connecticut State Legislature?
It is, and I think maybe chalk it up to new lawmakers, maybe chalk it up to a new administration, but there doesn't seem to be a lot that has been accomplished so far this year. And you're right. I think we're going to wait until the next few weeks and likely a special session at this point.
Oh, that's fun. Danny?
It seems to me that one of the reasons, in addition to what Christine said, is tolls. We have a centerpiece item in a way that we have not in recent years, especially from the governor. And he's well known to be behind closed doors, twisting arms or using whatever other cliche he chooses. To get votes. And so obviously that affects other votes, and so that delays other votes. Marijuana may come up because it's not part of the arm twisting. There aren't a lot of – there's maybe some horse trading, but there's not a lot of – in marijuana, there's not a lot of you vote for this or else stuff. But a lot of these things are connected. Obviously, the budget, tolls, and it's hard to do one without knowing what you're going to have on the other, and so that's part of the reason for the delays.
But before we get into the specifics, Colin, this process, does it feel different to you at all?
It does feel a little different for all the reasons that Christine and Dan are saying. And when you talk to, sometimes the best people to talk to about things like this are either lobbyists or people who are up at the Capitol on behalf of, say, nonprofits that are, really concerned about certain issues because they have a really vested interest in getting a good count, knowing what has to happen to get the thing that they want. And I'm not up at the Capitol the way Christine is, but just in talking to lobbyists who are usually somewhat reliable, or at least they claim to know, the kinds of people who will tell you with great confidence that they know, they don't. And I think that what goes along with this is the thing that Dan and Christine are both saying, too. There's also this kind of nobody seems to be particularly worried about anything. There's no particular urgency. And I do attribute that a little bit. Maybe it's a good thing about the Ned Lamont gubernatorial style. His so-called legislative shop isn't quite as professionalized, isn't quite as experienced as maybe those of governors in the past. He's tried to beef up its ranks. In particular, I think we mentioned this last week, adding Jonathan Harris, a former state senator, to see if he can speak the language of the natives. I think because Well, I'll just say one more thing about this. I think I said this on the air at one point. I've seen Lamont in his first term be kind of like a chicken in a barnyard. He just kind of walks around pecking at stuff, that catches his eye. So yeah, tolls, let's do this. And rather than having come in with Lamontism as a well-crafted, unified, understood set of ideas. And so, I mean, there is no such thing as Lamontism. And maybe
Well,
that's a good thing.
It's because there's a vaccine.
They are about to debate today. The House is about to debate the minimum wage, and they still have no firm, solid idea for what they're going to do with the tip credit. And the tip credit is the wage that waitresses and bartenders are paid, which is lower than the minimum wage. But assuming that you're getting
and
tips.
is that because of competing ideas about that, or is that because there's no clear guidance really coming from the top as to what we want to do with the minimum wage?
There's no clear guidance coming from the top or from legislative leadership even.
I think it's a good thing.
What's a good thing?
It's a good thing to debate issues on the floor. We've lost that in the last few years. Everything is done behind closed doors. Good. Let them debate on the floor and let people actually not know what's going to happen. Now, there is already been an agreement contrary to what the committee voted yesterday on the phase-in. I believe the Finance Committee voted a 3-year phase-in for the minimum wage?
They did for that bill, but
but it's a 4-year.
Speaker Arasimowicz said it's going to be a 4-year.
Right, it's a 4-year. So there are some things that are being settled, but I think it's fine if they discuss things and say we don't know what we're going to do.
Well, and I just say to talk about the phase-in, just so people who don't understand what's being debated at the legislature about the minimum wage, what is getting phased in theoretically?
So the minimum wage would be a phase-in to $15 an hour over 4 years as opposed to 3 years.
So
and opponents of this want it to be phased in over 5 years.
This is not unlike what the state of Massachusetts has done. They already have a plan to get to $15 an hour on minimum wage, Colin?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think Christine is right that one of the things that has to be resolved and has to be resolved in a way that's relatively satisfactory is how do you deal with people who are, in fact, or employers, restaurant employers who are eligible for the opportunity to pay less than the minimum wage. So what's that going to be? What's less than the minimum wage going to be? Another issue that's surfacing, I don't know how to evaluate it without having them open their books and show, is that nursing home employers are saying in particular that if they have to pay these wages, they're either going to have to cut down on the staff that delivers care or make some other kind of fatalistic adjustment. And of course, it's a very vulnerable population. It's people's moms and dads and grandparents and stuff like that. So it is easy to induce a certain kind of semi-panic about something like that.
Well, and there was an indication that they were going to, they kind of called off their strike notice because there was an indication from the Lamont administration and lawmakers that they would add the increase in the Medicaid funding, and that increase in Medicaid funding would then go towards increasing salaries.
And there's still a debate about the training wage, the very controversial training wage. That's in which certain people of a certain age or experience don't get the full minimum wage. And the danger there, it says, well, it sounds great because if somebody's committed, they're in a job for 6 months, then they get the minimum wage. Until then, they get what's called the training wage. The hazard there is that there's turnover and employers fire people and only use people in the training wage.
Well, I think that they agreed yesterday that they were going to do the student wage as opposed to a training wage.
There's a lot of words for it, but it don't matter.
I know. For 16 and 17-year-olds, it would be up to 90 days. You could pay them 85% of the minimum wage.
The danger is that other people get fired and they keep turning those over.
But before we move on from this, Danny, and Colin mentioned what's potentially the big problem for nursing homes. We hear this from businesses of all types. I mean, should we kind of disaggregate the different types of businesses that may be affected by minimum wage? Maybe nursing homes are something that we have to look at slightly differently than, I don't know, movie theaters or wherever else we're going to be hiring people who often work at the minimum wage. Danny?
I think that the more you separate it, the more you create controversy around special favors for this one and that one. Look, the restaurants, and we all have friends who own and manage restaurants, and they're saying that this is going to be the death of them. And while I respect their views, they also said that about the end of smoking, which was, in fact, the dead opposite. People like me started actually going to restaurants again. Now, not to say that minimum wage is going to bring more people to restaurants, but there's a lot of this is the death of us stuff at the Capitol and in general, discussion. And rarely are things the death of us.
I remember buying liquor on Sundays was going to be the death of us as well. As Colin, quick thought?
One thing to remember is Connecticut's a very expensive place to live. And people who make the minimum wage inevitably are going to have to find other kinds of additional employment unless they have other family members who are bringing home a lot of bacon. And so you really are talking about, do you want a workforce that's really tired most of the time? Do you want people taking care of your grandparents who are exhausted from their other job? I mean, you can't live on the minimum wage in Connecticut. So, I mean, and particularly in Connecticut. So that's the argument, I think, for bumping up the minimum wage and figuring out, the nursing homes just may have to figure out. I think Danny's right. I think carve-outs are going to cause all kinds of trouble.
We just did a housing episode of Next last week. The housing wage in Connecticut is calculated some $25. And that's on the low side for people to actually be able to afford an apartment in most of the towns and cities. Let's move on to highway tolls. We mentioned it earlier, Christine. What's happening? I mean, this is the thing that we came out of the gate talking about. Ned Lamont at first, we're going to toll trucks, then we're going to toll everybody, and then people start to show up and conservative talk show hosts have a field day with tolls. You still see all sorts of former candidates for governor talking about tolls. Where are we with tolls right now?
Thursday, so tomorrow, the No Tolls group is going to deliver 100,000 signatures to Governor Lamont's office. Governor Lamont's office is supposed to be putting forward some sort of new, more specific toll proposal either by the end of this week or early next week.
Like where the gantries would be, where you'd be tolling, that sort of thing?
Right. Well, some of this stuff still needs to be negotiated with the Federal Highway Administration. So I don't know how you get the legislature to pass something that's vague enough to be negotiated with the Federal Highway Administration when people do want some specifics and some guarantees as to, how much additional money they're going to have to pay for their commute to work. So that's going to be a really difficult thing for them to get around. I know they are currently trying to negotiate this, but I'm not sure we know where it lands at the moment.
Or if it lands, Danny?
I'm starting to get tired of the call for more details on tolls, and I'm all for details, and I make my living writing long columns that are full of details. But in this case, we really do have enough to go on. You got 4 highways, which we all have been talking about, 91, 95, Route 15, which is the Merritt and the Wilbur Cross, and what am I missing? 84. Oh, yes, 84. The one I live on. 84. It's about 4.5 cents a mile, give or take a little bit, right? Which means that any individual trip is going to be a nominal cost. Over time, if you take a long trip on one of these highways every day, your costs are going to be higher. We get all that. Gantries about every 6 miles. The details that we need in order for people to make their minds on this are pretty much in place. We know the need. We know the time periods. The fine point details matter to a point, but I think that's to a degree being used as a crutch by people who are choosing to sit on the fence.
Well, it's interesting that the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee did not include tolls as part of their budget proposal, and the Republican plan to borrow money and reprioritize some of the projects we already have on that list assumes that Connecticut will continue to borrow $1.9 billion a year, which is not in adherence with Governor Lamont's debt diet.
You're going to get yelled at for oversimplifying, just telling you.
It's fine. I'm good with that. But so, Governor Lamont went on this tour and he toured with all these investors and they got this great, rate on the bond offering. And so I don't think that, and since he's still in charge of the bond commission, even though John Finfaro would like to see him not in charge of the bond commission, I don't think that is necessarily going to work.
Colin?
One of the things I think that we're going to be looking at here as this thing comes closer to reality, I guess I'm A, channeling Bill Curry, and B, kind of in a mood about what it's like to live in Connecticut. So Connecticut has notoriously terrible land use planning. So as a result, people often commute long distances because they're, if you have one person who winds up with a job in, some office park in Enfield, and then the other person has a job in some, multi-use thing in off Route 6 in Farmington or something. And so you try to get a house that's halfway between those two things, and then you commute long distances. And so if you're going to be using those particular highways, any kind of gantry highway, it is going to be a lot more expensive to commute. I mean, slightly under a nickel a mile, I think. At peak, It's 4.4 cents. So, I mean, that's not nothing if you're commuting 25 miles a day, 5 days a week, both ways.
Both ways.
Yeah. It's
against
not
the wind.
Right. It's not nothing. It will be an imposition. In a way, you kind of look at it and say, maybe this will help people understand why it's bad not to plan to have center cities with mass transit going into them. them why this whole, incredible developmental sprawl that we've lived through for decades now has created an untenable situation where people either are going to have to be on secondary roads, which count on that, or pay quite a bit to commute.
But the problem, I think, the inherent intellectual problem right now that faces tolls is that this would be the money raised in order to rebuild and maintain the exact highway system that is the cause of those problems. It's not as though what we're saying is we're going to spend a whole bunch of money on something that's brand new and is going to get us off those roads. It's like just to fix the potholes on the roads that it's going to cost you 4 cents a mile.
Right.
We're going to take 4 cents a mile.
You have highlighted the intellectual deficiency in this whole idea.
There is another aspect to it, which is its congestion pricing, which means that you're pricing it higher when traffic is heavy. Therefore, it does improve efficiency. It also frees up other money for mass transit. I hesitate to use the word mass transit, but for public transit.
It frees up other money.
Yes, because in other words, you can't take toll money to use on trains. But once you have all the toll money you need to fix all your roads, you can take the money you were borrowing to use for transit and use it on that.
As Christine knows, that's exactly how priorities are made up at the Capitol, right? As soon as you don't see, you can just save that money and put it right toward mass transit, right? And really have a big plan for that. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think that it's just a mess right now, and I think that there's this I don't know even how to explain it, but that we did a really bad job of managing the Special Transportation Fund for a really long time and managing the state finances overall. And at some point, somebody has to pay the piper.
Let's move on to the next big issue in green on my rundown here that was supposed to be a highlight of this legislative session. What exactly is happening with recreational marijuana, Christine? Danny had mentioned it earlier. Are we going to get a pot bill through the legislature?
I think that they saw it as a good sign that the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee included revenue from the sale of cannabis as part of their budget package.
Not in the budget,
right?
Cannabis in the budget.
In the budget. But I don't know if necessarily it's going to go across the finish line. Apparently, Dan has a count.
The general thinking, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Christine, is that the votes are in place in the Senate for likely approval.
Yes.
And so the House is the question, and there are a number of holdouts in the House. According to, I spoke to Josh Elliott, my buddy who we had our travels to Massachusetts with.
Oh, yeah.
There are, and it's not his count. There are some other people who have done a count, but they've all looked at it together. 16 holdouts in the House that are on the fence.
Holdouts.
Democrats.
Yeah.
9 solid against, 66 solid for. So you take those 66, you need to get to 76 to pass the bill.
Yep.
There are believed to be a couple of Republicans who will vote for it if it has the votes. So let's say you need 8 or 9 or 10 of those holdouts. So it's really very much in a 50-50 look right now because if you have 16 on the fence and you need half of them, that's obviously impossible to predict. In that case, unlike tolls, I think the details matter a lot more, and people are waiting for details.
Just for the folks at home, I mean, one reason toll receipts wouldn't be in the budget, but pot receipts would be, is toll receipts are not available until 2024. So, I mean, you can't budget. I mean, if
you could. I mean, you could go out and securitize the revenue stream if you wanted to, which Lamont has hinted at, but has never formally proposed.
Everybody pretty nervous.
Yeah, when would pot receipts hit the budget? I mean, it's taken years to get legal marijuana up and running in states like Massachusetts or Colorado or Washington. I mean, it doesn't happen tomorrow.
Right, which is a fair point. I really do wonder if I had to talk about a bill that I thought among the sort of big 5 or whatever list there is of important legislation that I think will face some significant hurdles. I do think recreational marijuana may have some real problems, notwithstanding the head count that I like head count, actually.
Head count is good, yes.
Well, a better way to talk about pot.
The key thing is that Republicans are going to be free to vote for it. Unlike with tolls, where any Republican who votes for tolls, well, it's not going to happen because they would not be able to function in their party anymore. Whereas with marijuana, it's a vote of conscience. And so there may be a few.
And I'm just thinking here that they could actually – so if you're going to go into overtime and into a special session, the thing that's going to go over into overtime in a special session is going to be the budget, because all the other legislation dies on June 5th. So if they can get the framework for recreational marijuana passed, they can throw the revenue into the budget and not worry about it.
Yeah, the other thing they can do is instruct the state agency to set it up, DCP, Consumer Protection, to set it up, and let's come back next year and approve it, but it'll all be set up.
We're going to quickly do a lightning round on some other things that we've been talking about. Not sure if they're going to get through. While we're on vices, let's go to sports betting, casino expansion. What's happening with sports betting, Christine?
We've heard nothing about sports betting or a casino expansion or anything like that. Not even related to the Kentucky Derby.
Which is interesting, Dan. I'll just say, because there's one, sports betting, which in theory could get up and running faster. In theory, has a lot more revenue that potentially could come to the state than who knows what's going to happen with a legalized marijuana a bill. This isn't even being really talked about.
Sportech, the New Haven-based company that makes that runs the OTB locations, put out a release that they took 400,000 bets on the Kentucky Derby. Hey, we're ready to go. Let's expand this. The problem there is that talks with the tribes are not going well.
Right.
Colin?
Speaking of someone who put 6 different bets on the Kentucky Derby and somehow or other managed to avoid betting on maximum security, was disqualified, or God knows, country house. I've experienced, what sports betting can do to your wallet. I am agnostic about a lot of these things in the lightning round. I don't know whether the votes are there for exactly the reason that we started out talking about. It's very difficult to get from anybody, except for Dan's headcount on pot, much of a clear picture about whether this stuff is going to go forward or not. And a lot of it depends on how badly the governor's office wants it, and then how good they are at working the legislature, and whether, Marty Looney in the Senate, we've been talking mainly about the House. Marty Looney in the Senate, 40% of his caucus are new senators, and new senators who are sometimes unpredictable. Will Haskell and Alex Bergstein, who are down from Fairfield County, brand new senators, have not always followed Marty Looney's lead early in the session, too. So you've got some wild cards there.
Last two things, Christine. Public option, paid family leave. These were important issues. Are we looking to see either of these come through?
I think that they are going to probably move forward with the public option and paid family leave if they can manage their time appropriately and get them through both chambers.
If they can manage their time appropriately, which is always the issue. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about vaccinations for measles, measles outbreak around the country, and it's being dealt with at the state legislature right now and also across this state. We're also going to be talking about the state's tourism campaign and whether or not it needs an overhaul. We're talking with Christine Stewart from ctnewsjunkie.com, with Dan Haar from Hearst, Connecticut Media, with Colin McEnroe from The Colin McEnroe Show here in the Wheelhouse. This is The Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky, talking about the week's news with Christine Stewart from ctnewsjunkie.com, Dan Haar from Hearst, Connecticut Media, and our own Colin McEnroe. Colin, what's in your show today?
We're doing a show about doomsday preppers and sort of, we are going to talk very specifically about people who take this whole idea very, very seriously and have their bug-out bags, as they're called, all ready to go, and more than that. But we're also going to talk about people like, everybody's a little bit of a doomsday prepper. Most people have like some kind of plan for if the power goes out for, a long period of time. Or
really?
Some people don't.
I don't. What do you do?
You need one person in your house who's serious about it. Anyway, we'll be talking about that. You'll also meet some people who watch zombie movies to see what the people are doing wrong against the zombies and then correct their own behavior accordingly.
Okay, we'll be prepping for a good Colin McEnroe show later today. I also want to point out that Lucy Nalpathanchel and her team from Where We Live is holding a community conversation on police-community relations. It's happening tonight at the community center at Pope Park. We'll be talking about 2 recent police shootings in Connecticut, talking with a number of panelists and a number of community members. There's information. If you go to WNPR.org, you can check that out and you find out more information. Should be a very important, interesting conversation tonight in Hartford. Well, this week, State Attorney General William Tong jumped into the debate over the immunization of school children from a constitutional law perspective. Nothing stopping the legislature, Tong determined, from stripping parents of their ability to object to a child's vaccination due to their religious beliefs. The question's a bit of a political one, with the release of data on schools in Connecticut with the largest number of unvaccinated students. I suppose, Christine, before we get into the Tong end of this, let's just talk about this data that came out this week. School by school, town by town, how's Connecticut doing when it comes to vaccinating kids?
Well, overall, the vaccination rate of Connecticut looks really good. You know, we have 98.2% overall statewide. But the problem is when you drill down, there are a number of schools. There are 116 schools that fall under the standard by the CDC for the minimum of herd immunity, which is 95% for the measles vaccination. So it's kind of worrisome. Department of Public Health released this information, and they released the information. It's self-reported information from the schools to the state on a piece of paper. The piece of paper is then input by state employees at the Department of Public Health into the computer system.
A piece of paper.
Right. So the information on the piece of paper is then inputted by
There's
the
no way it
Department
can
of
be
Public Health.
digitally combined in any sort of way through some
No, because
database program?
No, because these forms are all paper forms, and the religious exemptions. If you claim your child has a religious exemption, you can scribble something down on a piece of paper, doesn't matter what it is, and then a school nurse or somebody else can just acknowledge your signature, and that counts towards your religious exemption.
Well, and one of the things we saw in some of the towns with the lower rates, there were problems with schools in Stamford, Bridgeport, Hartford, East Hartford, a number of other places, including a few with schools that had under 80% immunization.
Yeah, pretty scary, under 80%.
Under 80% starts to get into a big problem.
Didn't that include the flu, though? Didn't that include all the full series and not just the three? When
I was looking at the data, I was only looking at the measles data. So they do report the data based on each vaccine that you get, and I didn't believe that flu was actually included.
And as you reported,
in that.
they corrected some that were really small groups.
Right. So basically what they did was they accidentally had reported the schools that had under 30 kids.
Right.
Yeah,
they removed those.
I mean, Danny, what should we make of this? Before we get into what the Attorney General is saying about it, what do we make of schools that have rates this low? It seems like Connecticut as a whole is doing pretty well.
I think it's just bad habits, like people don't get around to getting their teeth done. I don't think this is people feeling deeply. I don't think there are towns in Connecticut in which 20% or more of the population of school children are in families that feel so deeply religiously about this that I think they're just not getting it done. And I think we can feel deeply religiously about not letting them in our schools.
Colin?
I think it's easier to regulate public schools than private schools, and I think Dan's right that when you look at some of these, most of these numbers you just quoted the names of the places. They're mostly urban environments where they're just the public health initiatives may not be reaching as many people as they could. I think if you educate parents enough. I mean, there's going to be resistance anywhere, but I think if you educate parents enough, you'll be fine. Now, some of the private schools they're looking at have incredibly high unvaccinated rates. I mean, 34% of the students, are unvaccinated. Now, a lot of these are schools like, I think one of them was a Waldorf Academy. That's the kind of place where parents are already making a set of choices that depart somewhat significantly from the, orthodox value set of American public life. And so it may be harder to radicalize those people about getting vaccinated.
Well, given the Attorney General's statement on this week, what can or should the state do about this?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think Tong essentially has it right. The Establishment Clause doesn't protect you. I mean, the way that I always put it is, look, you're free to exercise your religion when you're exercising your religion. You are not free to run a lunch counter according to the dictates of your religion if the dictates of your religion violate public health laws, or if you, because of your religion, refuse to seat some minority group in your lunch counter. You can't do that, all right? So what we understand is the free exercise of religion doesn't necessarily cross over into areas that impact other sectors of the public and also violate laws.
And I don't think that I've run into anybody who is not vaccinating their child that had a deeply held religious belief in order not to vaccinate their child, they are not vaccinating their child because they believe vaccines are dangerous.
Right.
And this is a debate that is going on across the country, and it's a debate that at the state capitol, Christine, we're reading here from Christine Dempsey and Danielle Altamari in the Hartford Courant, as the debate over childhood immunization heats up at the state capitol. Police are investigating allegations the children of 2 state representatives were threatened by a vaccination foe. Capitol Police are looking into the complaint that Representative Liz Linehan and House Majority Leader Matt Ritter were targeted by a Twitter user who referred to their children as the spawn of the devil.
They said Satin spawn, not Satan spawn in the tweet. So it was a grammatically incorrect tweet all around.
That's shocking to me.
There have been no arrests made.
There have been no arrests made. In that case.
Yes.
All right. So let's move on from this very important issue to something that's also important, but maybe not quite as serious. Jobs and tax revenues tied to out-of-staters vacationing in Connecticut are on the rise, according to a new study released this week. The news comes just at the same time the state may be ending its widely panned, but maybe successful, still revolutionary tourism campaign. So, Colin, let's start with you. There's an awful lot to talk about in here. First of all, it seems like we're doing okay with tourism.
It seems like we're doing okay with tourism. So the still revolutionary slogan, to me, that's the lazy person's way of talking about this subject. And so, yeah, they've dropped it off the tourism website. It's, I don't think, 100% clear that they'll never, ever use it again. Although Lamont doesn't like it, I don't think it maybe has enough defenders to keep it going. But here's the real truth. It doesn't matter. Here's the things that matter. Are you adequately funding your tourism efforts, or are you? I mean, it got to its worst point under Jody Rell, where people may remember that we were actually dropped off a New England tourism map. Connecticut was no longer part of New England because we weren't actually paying some kind of dues that we were supposed to pay to a New England tourism group. So, for example, that would affect Next, I think,
right?
pretty deeply
I
your
know.
program. And the other thing is, are you really thinking when you try to develop a tourism program? As I said to you yesterday, we're not going to outdo Vermont with mountains or Idaho with waterfalls. There are areas where this state punches above its weight, and you have to think about what those things are and how you're going to maximize them and create a tourism strategy that can be used with ease by people coming to this state and understood with ease by people coming to this state and is, for one reason or another, very attractive. I don't want to eat up too much time, but I can give examples later if necessary.
Okay, so before we get to some of Colin's examples, I don't know, Danny, what do you make of this? I mean, Connecticut has always struggled with its identity. Where are we in the world between Boston and New York? How should we talk about ourselves? Still revolutionary comes out. We all pan it. How should we be talking about the state to get people to come here?
Well, look, we all know in Connecticut there are just fabulous places to go and be and do. We're not going to be a major destination like Las Vegas or Cape Cod or Boston. That's not going to happen. And so the general gist of marketing and tourism over the years has been about keeping people here, recognizing what's here. Right. The major source of tourism in Connecticut is people who live here. Right. And I believe that the $15.5 billion in counts, some of these studies count. I'm looking at it now, and I haven't figured out whether it counts people who are already here. I believe it does. Right. So if you and I go to a restaurant, that's tourism spending.
Jody
right?
Rell called it a staycation.
Well, that's right. And so, I don't know if I love that word, but that's sort of the first core. And then you market to New York and Boston to say, on a very targeted basis, come to the Mystic Aquarium, come to Norwalk, South Norwalk, look around, that sort of thing. And that's great. And I think in our case, tourism needs to be much more intimately connected to lifestyle of the state. It's kind of an okay place to be. It's not great. It's not. It's in one of the
great slogan.
I'm writing this
great
down.
slogan.
One of the great things about Connecticut that I noticed is that, and I wrote a column about this, is that Connecticut and Illinois came out first or last among states where people, if they could live somewhere else, they would. Right? They were 49 and 50. If you could live somewhere else, would you? And the answer was yes. And I took that as a positive because Connecticut doesn't have the very best of anything: mountains, beaches, cities, farmland, whatever you want to call it. You can go to Montana for mountains. You can go someplace else for the very best. But Connecticut has a pretty good sampling of everything, and that needs to be the way we focus.
A pretty good sampling of everything. I like that
Colin's
as Danny's
shaking his head.
slogan, Christine.
We're just okay. I guess.
fine,
I don't
really.
know.
Connecticut, we're fine.
You know, as somebody who moved from Illinois to Connecticut, Connecticut
Upwardly mobile.
I guess, apparently. I mean, I'm in another state where apparently people don't want to live. But, I think Connecticut has a lot of great stuff to offer. I mean, from our state parks, to our attractions. Yes, we don't have any huge cities, but I don't know. I think I kind of like it that way.
I'm wondering, Colin, how then we think about this. So you looked at the tourism slogans from other places. Slogans aren't obviously all of it, as you've said. There's a lot of different ways to think about it. I mean, how should we be thinking about marketing the state?
Yeah. First of all, a lot of states do what we appear to be on the verge, or what we're doing right now, which is whatever their state slogan is, it doesn't appear on their website. Go on the Idaho website, it says "Visit Idaho." It doesn't say their slogan always has something to do with
Pass the
potatoes.
potatoes, doesn't
yeah.
it?
So. I would say, once again, look at let me give just an easy example. Okay, so one reason that people travel, and a surprising number of them do, is to visit Civil War battlegrounds, right? People will go all over the place to go to Civil War battlegrounds. We obviously don't have those, but I think we do have a really interesting Revolutionary War story to tell. I'm saying this several days before the new Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., which is like $146 million revamped museum. I mean, we have a story of espionage and treachery and perfidy, right? We have Nathan Hale and we have Benedict Arnold. We have Fort Griswold, where Arnold enabled the British to come in. You've got a kind of an Alamo type story where a small militia garrison there tried to fight off this overwhelmingly large British force. Ultimately, the British burned New London. Remember, Fort Griswold became one of the slogans of the revolutionary effort. Supposedly, Lafayette yelled that at Yorktown. You've got a pretty interesting story, but you want to emphasize Benedict Arnold and Nathan Hale. These are like the two big names to come out of our state. And you want to create a kind of a geographical storyline where you visit Fort Griswold, you visit a couple of maybe other Benedict Arnold sites and the Nathan Hale sites, or up in Coventry and places like that. You could really, and then at those sites, you have to have program. You have to have stuff going on that's really interesting so that people walk away and say, wow, I didn't know that. I'm so glad we went there. And you have to do that with every single aspect of Connecticut. Where are the areas where we have distinguishing characteristics that you could turn into part of a campaign?
Well, and go ahead.
So are we still revolutionary?
Well, I mean, I would give that up anyway.
Okay.
So
I think
he
that's a
sort of
real
likes the idea of tying it to revolutionary. You mentioned this earlier. You were talking about, we don't have any big cities here. You come from Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Illinois is like Chicago and corn. I mean, there's
Right.
there's a lot of Illinois.
There
that's
is a lot. There's a difference. Yeah.
And I think that part of the problem that in Illinois has, or Pennsylvania where I grew up, is there's a lot of way you have to drive a long way. You're either in Pittsburgh or you're in Philadelphia when you're in Pennsylvania. You're not really going to travel the whole state. What Colin's saying is we could come up with something that allows you to kind of within a couple hours drive around our entire state and find some really cool stuff.
Well, and I think it's actually what I did when I first came out here. I mean, I went to the Mark Twain House and the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, which is great because it's all right there, and then learning the history of Bushnell Park and the Park River. But I think that they do have to do a better job of tying some of that stuff together. There are a lot of great things to see and do in Connecticut.
Yeah.
I don't know that it does have to be thematic, or I shouldn't say it doesn't have to be. That's a small piece of it. I think for the largest part, after 40 years of being here, and I grew up in New Jersey, we can talk about tourism there as well. I still like
Great
getting
rest stops, though.
I
Great
still
rest
like
stops.
to get in the car in West Hartford and drive down the river towns and see what I see. And I'm not necessarily looking for, somebody's birthplace. It's just a kind of a cool place to be. And I would add that the lack of growth in Connecticut over the last 30 years has actually helped, not hurt, because it has prevented sprawl the way other states have.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was just going to mention that the rest areas are also not open yet. So, but that was in the legislature's budget. They do want to open up those rest areas.
That's right. We talked about this last week. That's very important. If you're going to get people coming into the state, it'd be
Yes.
nice to have some nice rest areas that you can stop at.
Also, didn't they just loot the state park money?
Did they, in order to do that, to open it up again?
I don't know for the rest areas, but
Okay.
I think they raided the state park fund again.
I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
Yeah, the state parks are it's truly one of the gems here. Well, I'll tell you what, if you find us on Twitter at WNPR Wheelhouse. Send us your ideas, not just for the slogan, how we can brand the state. We'd love to hear some of your ideas. We can talk about those in the next
Can
couple
we
of
quickly
weeks.
say there's a huge meeting going on today? Bringing
yes,
bringing
the
all
tourism.
the there's a huge tourism conference.
Yes.
About Connecticut tourism down at the convention center today, bringing all the players together.
Yeah, and maybe they'll be listening today and they'll come up with some good ideas.
And the governor is going to announce "Aw shucks" as the state slogan.
I don't think that's true. Danny Haar is from Hearst, Connecticut Media. Christine Storrs from CTNewsJunkie.com. Colin McEnroe's from here at Connecticut Public Radio. When we come back, we'll have some of our feats of strength or maybe some grumbles about the week and a few other stories we haven't gotten to yet in the Wheelhouse. This is the Wheelhouse. I'm John Dankosky talking about the week's news with Colin McEnroe, Christine Stewart, and Dan Haar. Just a few things to get to before we finish out the show. Danny, I'm reading here from your newspaper. Lender accuses banking department of meddling in other states' audits?
Yes, this is a serious issue. That's,
Okay, explain.
Yeah, this is the really short version here is this is a mortgage lender that had 175 people in East Hartford. They're down to about 60, in part because of the market, but in part because they're under siege by the state of Connecticut banking department. It's called First Alliance Lending. And the state banking department apparently, and they haven't denied this, is going around calling other departments in other states saying, you may want to look into these people. Now, what they have said to me is that they are not influencing other states. Influence is a term of art that means having an effect. They
Yes.
have not denied that they're calling, and I have seen and or heard and or witnessed evidence of this. And so it's on one hand part of what regulators do. They communicate with each other, and on another hand, it's unseemly. You have an investigation that's ongoing. There's not yet been a hearing against this lender for allegedly using unlicensed people to write mortgages. The lender to sell mortgages. The lender completely denies that it's doing anything at all illegal and has hired Ross Garber, the famous lawyer who represented John Rowland and three other governors. And it's a tough case. And for Connecticut to be calling other regulators, if that's true, and really arm twisting and saying go after these guys would be, in my view, unseemly.
Interesting. Okay, so an unseemly story. Christine, I just want to ask you quickly. We spent the first part of the show talking about things that haven't gotten done, but the House has given the go-ahead on a few sort of important gun bills, one having to do with a gun storage law and one having to do with ghost guns, both of which we talked about in the programs here. Maybe you can talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so the gun storage law passed last night. Kristen and Michael Song are the parents of Ethan Song, who lost his life when he was playing with what he thought was an unloaded handgun in a friend's house down the street. And so they passed a law that says that loaded and unloaded guns have to be safely stored in homes with children under 18 years old. So that was a pretty moving and touching it was very bipartisan, too. So this was not something, it's something that could have been a partisan issue, but was not a partisan issue. They were able to win over support of a lot of Republicans.
And that's, again, that's not something that happens in every state. Republicans, as Danny was saying earlier, Republicans across the board aren't able to function in their party in Connecticut if they say yes on tolls, but they can function independently when it comes to issues like this.
They can, which is a really good sign. And they're hoping that, maybe this bipartisan support is something that can help them take the measure either to other states or to help boost their chances of passing this at the national level in Washington. And
the House voted 108 to 36 to ban so-called ghost guns. It's a big, wide range of things.
Right.
I think what people are scared about is 3D printers, people assembling guns at home, guns that aren't assembled someplace by a manufacturer that you can make at home, causing a huge problem.
Right. And so these guns don't have any serial numbers. They can't be traced. And so they want to have some sort of accountability. And there were actually recently in Bridgeport, there were 7 ghost guns taken off the street recently. So it isn't a problem that doesn't happen here in Connecticut.
It's actually something that's an issue. Colin?
Right. Yeah, I think one thing that we have to acknowledge is that, as you say, I mean, the progress we make here in Connecticut is not necessarily mirrored across the country. But there also are no small fights, no fights that aren't worth having about this issue. I mean, in one of the usual deeply paradoxical moments that seem to accompany this issue, Connecticut, yes, we got 2 victories last night in the House, just as 10 miles from Littleton, Colorado, another school shooting with a fatality. So there's a long, long way to go in this country.
Do you have a thought, Danny?
Well, I think it's laudable that we had a bipartisan moment yesterday on this. It's just unbelievable that that's not law everywhere in every state and federally. That gun storage, that's just remarkable to me.
Yeah, and this set up both my feat of strength and my grievance of the week. I'm going to point you to Vox's excellent map-based data set of the 2,043 mass shootings that have happened in America since Sandy Hook. They, of course, had to update it again yesterday after that fatal shooting at a Colorado school just a few miles from Columbine, sending out love, of course, to that community today and everyone whose lives have been impacted by this decades-long epidemic. At this point, with 2,043 mass shootings since Sandy Hook, it's fair to say that it's touched just about everyone in America by this point. So that's my airing of grievances and my feat of strength. What do you have this week, Christine?
So I have a grievance this week.
Okay.
And my grievance is freshman lawmakers. They should be seen and not heard. And
I love this.
There
I wish
seems
we had
to
more
be
time for
like
this now. This is great.
there seems to be no sense of seniority anymore in the House and the Senate. And so I guess I kind of contribute the chaos that's ensued as a part of that because they just feel so emboldened and that they,
But isn't this a national movement, right? This is AOC at the Capitol of Washington coming in saying, I'm not going to play by your rules. I'm going to set my own agenda, and people are going to love me for it. This is the same thing, isn't it?
The same thing. So these lawmakers came into the state of Connecticut feeling the same way.
So what's wrong about that? They're representing their constituents. They're trying to get stuff done.
Good for them. They can get stuff done in maybe year 4. Get reelected again, and then we'll see if it's for real.
Christine, start wanting the freshmen to tap their brakes a little bit. This is it as an interesting grievance. Maybe we'll come back to that. What do you have this week?
Mine dovetails very well with that. I'm going to give my feat of strength to Representative Vin Candelora, the Republican deputy minority leader in the House, who continues to carry the weight of trying to create justice in the 120th, where 75 votes didn't happen because the wrong ballots were given out, and we have no idea who would have won that race. It's an absolute toss-up. I would give, and he once again last night in the middle of what Christine reports is a 3-hour debate on a relatively should have been simple voter expansion bill, he brought up yet again an amendment for the second time to try and bring some justice to that issue. In this case, it was to bring – it's a technicality that I don't want to get into. My consonant grievance is against Representative Phil Young, who voted 2 weeks ago in the question of whether his having to go through another election was germane as an amendment. He actually voted in that, which technically speaking is not a violation, an ethics case, because in Connecticut, unless you are enriched, there are no ethics violations. But that I would give that a grievance.
And even sometimes if you are enriched, there's no ethics violations.
Well, that's exactly
that's another thing that we can save for another day. Colin, how about you? What's in your mind?
Okay, so I guess I'll do a feat of strength to a musical performer here in Connecticut. On Sunday, I was at Infinity Hall helping out with this thing that Jim Chapdelaine, our friend, does for the movement Indivisible, and it's an all-star musical performance, including some pretty well-known veteran performers, particularly of the folk scene, people like Jonathan Edwards. Big Al Anderson from NRBQ came back for this. But the person who blew the ceiling off Infinity Hall was Nikita Waller, our Connecticut troubadour. She did A Change Is Gonna Come and just absolutely killed everybody, had the audience giving her a standing ovation. So she's young. She wasn't afraid of any of these people. She really kind of worked with the band a lot and worked with the audience, and she's just terrific. My other cultural thing would be a grievance, and that is, Christine during one of the breaks was talking about coming here and discovering Nook Farm, where Harriet Beecher Stowe and Mark Twain's houses are. One thing we have never done here in Hartford Hartford is link all this stuff together. Noah Webster's house is not far away. If you're interested in the humanities, if you're interested in words, you're probably interested in all three of those people. And then Wallace Stevens has essentially nothing. A recent survey of like the greatest poets in the world, in the history of the world, ranked Wallace Stevens of Hartford number 5. This is like a list that started with Neruda at number 1 and Rumi at number 10. Wallace Stevens was 5. All he's got are some little signposts out on Asylum right now that sort of mirror one of his poems. But there should be more in Hartford, and then it needs to all be tied together so you can go after certain kinds of convention business that comes here. But you got to do something.
Insurance executive too.
I like these ideas, all of these ideas. Thank you so much to Colin McEnroe, host of the Colin McEnroe Show on WNPR. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks also to Danny Haar, editor and columnist at Hearst, Connecticut Media. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
Thanks to Christine Stewart, editor-in-chief of CTNewsJunkie.com. Thank you, Christine.
Thanks.
The Wheelhouse is produced by Scott Brady. Our executive producer is Katie Tolarski. Kyan Wolf is the technical producer. Thanks also to digital producer Carlos Mejia. I'm John Dankowski, and this is The Wheelhouse.